And it says 8:33 on my wonderful computer clock. This is the Oneness Talking Point with Melanie Brockwell from Oneness Business. And it feels like people are listening. So let's see how that goes. Some of us do really well when we feel like people are listening, and I don't know, it just sometimes it feels like there's a judging presence. I'm not sure, that's not quite the word. Assessing, maybe assessing presence, which is funny, because most of the time I feel like I am being witnessed, but not by something external. I feel like everything I do and say is being held by, or somehow in the awareness of, something sacred, not a being that has eyes and memory that watches and judges and assesses what's going on and intervenes and gives advice, not that kind of witness. It's not as layered and external, which makes it difficult to describe because we don't really have any other sense of reality except for layered and external when it comes to witnessing. And so this week is episode, let me look at my calendar, 9. And I say it like that because I'm not much for doing things at the same time every week, or every month or every fortnight on the same day. That kind of thing's just never floated with me. And you can say it's got something to do with the fact that, there's gypsy blood running through my veins, or you can say that it's a practiced art that I learnt from moving around a lot as a child. But I don't think that's necessarily true. I just think I have a very real sense of order in chaos, and there's something that pushes me, that urges me towards a less defined experience. Which is not to say that you can't go to work and do the same thing every day and realize that every moment you are stepping into a different river. I'm not talking about the rules for the universe. I'm just talking about the experience that I feel pushed into, which I understand as already on purpose, the same way that I understand whatever is natural and normal for you is already on purpose. And this week is co-creation. And although I'm not really sure where to start with that, I have had some conversations with a friend of mine who that kind of concept makes sense to, and they talk about it as a partnership. That you're both involved in some process, both contributing instructions and desires and actions into that partnership. And for them, that partnership is with the divine. For me, the concept of co-creation is moot, unnecessary, except in the experience of those that it feels that is their truth, that is what's going on, and that's the explanation that makes sense to them. So in my explanation of what makes sense to me in oneness, the experience of all that is as an alchemy, which if you've seen some of the previous conversations, I describe it as whirlpools in the ocean. So the whirlpool shape looks like it's a form, and you can point to it and say it's a particular shape that you would describe as separate from the ocean. But on closer examination, one understands that the whirlpool is made up of the ocean, and that even in any given moment, the drops that create or make up that shape are never the same. You know, as the whirlpool persists through what we call space-time or time-space, the drops that create it, that form it, are not the same drops from one moment to the next. There's a change in movement that occurs in the process of that shape appearing to be a shape. So for me, the concept of co-creation, the whirlpool is the ocean. So there's no co-partnership involved. There's no co-partnership necessary. We're not vessels inhabited by something divine or something that gives us life or something that gives us instructions. Even the appearance of the vessels themselves is the divine itself. So for me, and for all of the people, because I'm obviously not the only one, for all of the people who understand the appearance of as sacred rather than an illusion that, you know, you'll get over once you become enlightened, for me, the appearance of separation, the appearance of vessels, the appearance of you and me and, you know, intuitive instructions and the feelings of being witnessed, all of those things are the divine. All of those things are not a source from which all of this is created. And in this creation, there is a relationship and communication between the source and what has been created. For me, that story doesn't make sense except in the truth that's true for the people that it's true for. So for me, source is not a thing. It doesn't exist in another realm. It doesn't inhabit this reality. It's not responsible for the creation of this reality. It's not intervening and communicating with this reality. It's not evolving and informing and assisting and guiding this reality. It is this reality. It's the perception of this reality. It's the experience of this reality. It's everything that can be known and not known. So although I work with people and I, you know, honor the work of people who accept co-creation as a separateness, as a communication between those two elements, I was just going to say, I don't see it that way. And it feels like there's, you know, that's a segue into a conversation about, well, how can you use the word I if the only thing that is the divine? And I think that's where that whirlpool metaphor comes in. So as the whirlpool takes that form, if you can take that story a little bit further and give that whirlpool an experience, give that whirlpool a consciousness or sense of self, then that's akin to how I understand the concept of I. So in any moment, the divine that is making up the thing that is not really a form, that just appears to be a form, that's not really an I, that's separate from other I's, I understand that that's all just part of the whirlpool, which explains a lot for me. And it's why it's the story that makes sense for me until it doesn't, until the day that it doesn't. And then I guess the truth of the story will change. But at the moment, that story makes sense for me. And it also, it gives me a job in many ways, because the experiences that I'm having aren't reactions to or consequences of. And so it feels as if I'm being asked to create a new language for what that means when you get what looks like a cold, or when you have what feels like an empathic experience. If I sit with a client and have a vision of something that happened to them in their childhood, and I'm asked to articulate a particular picture, how is that not separate? How do I explain that? What kind of language can I use except for the language of separation, which says you actually are a physical thing that's separate from me, and I actually am a physical thing, and there is actually space between us. What other language, what other explanation is there? And that's what feels like the impetus of all of this is, which isn't necessarily what it is. I don't think we have a true sense of what's going on. I just think we get the instructions to have the explanations we have for a reason. That reason may be known or not known. So I kind of leave that what's actually going on stuff alone, because unless I'm asked to look at it and examine it, investigate it, and that being asked to is not a separate thing. It's not coming from, a channeled point of source. It's not coming from an external means via communication. That instruction is the same as breathing. That instruction is the same as impulse. That instruction is the same as electromagneticness. It's just that we've put all these different stories and categories, categorized all these different things. So that's an impulse of the ancient brain. And this is a consequence of the environment. And, we've got all these different ways of explaining what's going on. And in the alchemy of all that is of oneness, we don't need that anymore. It's not that we not curious. I'm very curious about physics and chemistry and history and neuroplasticity, so many things. There's just a sense that those explanations don't end where there is a concrete universe that has physical and non-physical things with molecules and a source which gives them life, which animates them, which is mysterious. That that conversation doesn't end there for me. That research, that investigation doesn't end there for me. It feels very natural to continue that research until, without a specific explanation, it's difficult to articulate. But what happens for me is that any why or any investigation ultimately leads to the same place. And that same place is all that is. Life is whatever the, seeming end point of that notion of what's responsible or what's going on doesn't really have a name for me. That's why I'm kind of sitting here going, well, how can I articulate it? What word can I use to make it clearer what I'm saying? Like, why do you feel that pain? If you follow all of the possible explanations, if I follow all of my possible explanations, they lead back to the place that says all that is. And if I start with the question of something to do with quantum physics, I follow all of the possible explanations and they naturally lead me. I don't have to force them there. And I don't have to deny any Newtonian physics in order to get there. I don't have to deny any biomedical explanations to get there, whether it's about the quantum physics or the pain experience. All of those, those avenues of research naturally lead to that place. I think what happens is that we all stop our investigation at the point where we feel comfortable that we have found our truth. We don't need to go any further. And for me, that investigation doesn't end, doesn't feel complete, doesn't feel whole and finite until it leads back to that place, which is what the How to Be Medicine book, PhD project is all about, is what happens for me. How is it possible to ask any question and end up in that all that is place, which is what all that is wants to do. I'm not sure how else to describe it, as the thing that appears to be me. The thing that appears to be me that is never fixed and concrete or separate from all that is. And so I guess the point, the place I would take this conversation is, that's all well and good. Dismiss it necessarily. Use it as a reaction bouncing off point for your own sense of, what does co-creation mean for you? Do you have a sense of, the layers and levels of source to other realms, to angels, to guides, to us? Do you have that kind of hierarchy going on where there's a line of communication that travels through those different languages, through those different doorways, through those different dimensions? Do you have a very physical picture that just says animate force is yet to be explained? It doesn't need to have any kind of mystical source, and so the concept of, where does my motivation come from? Where does my knowing come from? Where does my intellectual interest and focus and fascination come from? Can be traced back to some genetic, social environment, parenting explanation. So you don't, this isn't about saying, oh, it's all so mystical and you have to believe in something bigger than yourself, blah, blah, blah. This, yes, this is about my understanding of that term and concept and the lived experience of, as much as it is about asking you as a, fascinated human being, what does it mean to you? And my understanding of why I'm interested and what's fascinating will come back to all that is, through a whole series of explanations along the way. And I guess it's like one of those, if it's not engineering, then what's the point? You can't do anything with it. You can't make any money from it. What are the practical applications? I feel like that's something kind of buzzing around. If you're listening to this, then I guess the question is, well, what are the practical applications of self-awareness? Where have they helped you in the past? Where have they been useful for you? Who do you look at in your environment, whether you know them or don't know them, and say, if only they were a bit more self-aware? What do you think would change in them, in your relationship with them, in the world, if they had more self-awareness? And then come back to why it's important for you. Because I guess it's also about, well, where do the standards change? The standards I'm applying to what I call other people and the standards I'm applying to myself. And even that's an interesting question to pose. What's the benefit of, what's the point of, what's the reason behind, what's the purpose of applying different standards to those I call other than to that I call self? You can kind of take it in any direction you feel called to. And when I say call to, you can insert useful, practical, in a line with what's going on in your life at the moment. If you're doing a business course and the business course is asking you to articulate what are you the best at in the whole universe, if you're doing a medical degree, like wherever you are, you can apply that query and make it relevant to what's going on for you. And I think that's the point for me when I'm working with people is, how is it relevant? Not, here are the questions and you need to ask yourself these, even if they feel like they're alien topics. I'm more interested in following you to where you naturally are. Which is why it's so lovely, because you can listen to this and whatever objections you have, write them down. Whatever I would have done it differently, you've got, go with them. Whatever I found really annoying, kind of move into those. I mean, there's a whole world of investigation of what I found annoying. depending on the explanation of the universe that you have, depending on your cosmology. And we'll definitely talk about that, you know, in the respect of how it's relevant to those different cosmologies throughout this series. And if you can think of other questions that feel relevant, feel free to share them with me, depending on where you find this, because I've got this in so many different places. And of course, there's sessions we can have private conversations if you feel like that's more, more important than any kind of ideological or self-examination. Sometimes saying things out loud feels more important to some, and it's not that you're saying it to me. I think it's just that you're saying it to something you call a person who is present to you, who is present to your wholeness and isn't going to hold you to anything that you have to say, or isn't going to limit you. Because sometimes you'll see a professional and you'll be able to be free with them about certain things, but there's an element to what's going on for you which they would pathologize, and that would kind of tighten the screws in one section of the conversation. So you either leave that part out in your sharing about what's going on for you, or you spend all this time trying to explain to them there's another way of understanding that. And so I find there aren't many places that we can go and speak our truth and say what's going on for us without someone having some point of pathology about it, like, oh, that's a sign of, I don't know, self-sabotage, or, I guess I am thinking about very specific people. I feel like when I listen to what they have to say about what they do, there's those tight screws. But when I have the experience of their work, that's not present. So, I can't kind of latch on to their explanation of what they do and how it makes sense to them, but I can work with them and have the experience of, what it is that they do. And it's necessary. I'm not sure where, this part of the conversation is going, but it's necessary for them to be that person who has that story. And it's necessary for me to encounter them with my difference. I don't see that as if only they could be different and there weren't any screw tightening things going on. I feel like that's part of that alchemy of all that is, that creates an impetus. The same way that the perception of a change in temperature is a perception. The alchemy of all that is, we've put the perception of change over here, and we've put the impetus of action. And in that picture of the universe where it's possible to have co-creation, you can have action and you can have impetus, But in that oneness experience, where co-creation is moot, everything is explained by the alchemy of all that is. This feeling, this thing I've called a feeling I'm having, this thing I'm called an impetus, this thing I've called perception of difference, this thing I've called perception of temperature. It's all the alchemy of all that is. And if it feels like there's further investigation, then that's also the alchemy of all that is. There's no point at which that diverges. Oh, but you've got cancer, so now it's definitely a thing. And, oh, but you're really crying because somebody died, so that's definitely a grief moment. That's a concrete explanation of things that are happening that you're reacting to. For me, it doesn't work that way. And I'm assuming the great assumption that for those having the oneness experience, it is also like that for them. You have all those things that we've labeled grief. We have all those things that we label disease and pain and poverty and want and desire and doubt. But none of those things are concrete. None of those things have the cause and effect relational explanation that a universe in separation has. And I almost want to say that a universe in separation enjoys, because it's not like there's some high and mightiness to that oneness experience where co-creation is moot. I still believe that picture that whoever is experiencing the universe of separation is just another whirlpool in the ocean. No greater, no lesser, no wiser, no less evolved, no more connected, made of and equal to the sacredness of the ocean, of which it is. It's not like it's been taken out and put over here. It's still part of. No. I guess the question I'm being asked to speak is, where do you feel part of? And if you picture all that is as an ocean, then how do you picture identity and self and experience and time? And what does it mean to you to be aware of those things? And what would it mean to meet someone who fully accepted your wholeness and your truth as sacred, even if it was completely different to theirs? And what do you think would happen for someone you're frustrated with, angry at, appalled by, to have their truth and wholeness accepted as equally sacred, even if it's different to yours? I'm not asking what would be required for you to do that. I'm asking, what do you think would happen for them? You're not going to be able to avoid what happens for you. I realize that. But have that conversation as well. But the question I really feel to focus on is what would happen for someone you're frustrated with, appalled by, angry at, to have their truth and wholeness accepted as sacred. And How to Me Medicine, the book and PhD, is about that conversation. It's about a certain type of logic that allows us to work with people and know ourselves in a very particular way. Without pathology, I guess. And within that, accepting the pathology as natural and sacred, if that is what is true for you. All right, I'm going to leave it there. And I'm just going to welcome your feedback. It feels like there's still something present here. That's why I'm sitting. Okay. Have a fabulous day. I'll see you next week.